Blake Lively walked into this whole thing thinking she was about to get a massive check and a massive win. Like we're talking $300 million in fees and damages. $300 million. That's the energy she came in with. But here's the thing that's been bothering me about how everyone's reporting this Blake Lively victory narrative right now. It's just not accurate. And honestly, when I started looking at what actually happened in Judge Lyman's ruling, I was like, oh, okay, this is way different than what the headlines are screaming. So let's just be real about what Blake actually got. She got attorney's fees. That's it. Not damages, not punitive damages, not triple damages, just fees. And not even for the entire case, just for the part of the case where she was defending against a defamation claim. Do you understand how small that portion actually is? Because I didn't. Not at first. Blake went into this thinking she was going to get everything. She had 13 claims. 10 of them got dismissed. 10. And then she settled on the rest and got nothing from that settlement. So she was sitting there already down massively. And then she pivoted to this whole 47.1 California law thing, which is supposed to protect actual victims of sexual harassment and assault. That's literally what the law is for. But Blake tried to use it to get money anyway, and Judge Lyman basically said no. But here's a partial yes on the attorney's fees thing. The statement came out from Brian Friedman, who's representing Justin Baldoni and the Wayfair companies. And it was chef's kiss. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. The man laid it out. He said Blake fought against a coordinated effort that allegedly involved sexual harassment, retaliation, and a smear campaign, and none of that actually happened, according to the court. He said she demanded over $300 million in fees and damages, had 10 claims tossed, then settled for nothing, and then when all the sexual harassment and defamation claims were thrown out, she pivoted to exploit this 47.1 law that exists to help real victims. That's the strategy. That's what happened. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part I think people are missing. Brian Friedman's statement also said that Blake only got awarded limited attorney's fees for a single claim, and the case lasted only a matter of months. Limited. He said that word specifically, and then he went after the narrative that Blake's team has been spinning, saying that his clients got blindsided by what he called a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and threatened by one of the most famous movie stars who tried to take away their life's work and reputations. And then he said something that I think matters more than people realize. He said, innocent people had their reputations unfairly damaged. Multiple people. Multiple. Because to win this new claim, she has to prove that her original allegations were truthful, not exaggerated, and not made with reckless disregard for the truth. And there's evidence in the record that makes that really difficult. Like not ambiguous evidence, specific documented contradictions. Colleen Hoover, the author of the book, gave deposition testimony that directly contradicts things Blake said. Blake claimed she never told Colleen to unfollow Justin Baldoni on social media. Colleen said under oath that Blake did ask her to unfollow him. That's not a misunderstanding. That's one person saying something happened and the other person saying it didn't. And one of them is the author of the source material who has no obvious reason to lie about a social media follow. There's also the claim about Sony and the dailies. Blake allegedly said she didn't tell Sony to destroy footage, and that got contradicted too. And then there's the Taylor Swift text messages that got deleted. I'm not even going to pretend I understand the full context of that one, but when you're in litigation and messages get deleted, judges notice. They really notice. So now Blake Lively is trying to use a statute that protects truthful accusers, but the factual record has multiple instances where her version of events doesn't match what other witnesses said under oath. In Brian Friedman's argument, which again is Baldoni's attorney, so take it with whatever salt you want, is that Blake settled because she was afraid to take the witness stand. His exact words, she did not want to face cross-examination by anyone because that would require her to actually tell the truth. That's a harsh thing to say about someone. But when you look at the settlement timing, less than 2 weeks before trial, after depositions had already happened, after those contradictions were already on the record, it's not unreasonable to think she didn't want to spend days being cross-examined about every inconsistency. And let's talk about the money part, because the money part is honestly the strangest part of all of this. The claim she's making now is for attorney fees and damages that resulted specifically from Baldoni's defamation suit against her. But here's the timeline problem. That defamation suit only existed for about a month before it got wrapped into the broader settlement. So even if she wins, which is a huge if, we're talking about 1 month of legal fees, maybe. And these are expensive lawyers, sure. But 1 month of even the most expensive lawyers in the world is not tens of millions of dollars. The estimate from people who actually practice this kind of law is maybe $50,000 tops. For context, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have a combined net worth that makes $50,000 look like what they spend on Met Gala after parties. It's a rounding error. It's a couple of lines on a balance sheet. And yet, here we are with motions and filings and legal teams burning billable hours over an amount that to them is essentially pocket change. But here's where it gets complicated in a way that actually makes me respect Judge Lyman's decision more. He knows this is the first time 47.1 is being tested in a case like this. First time. Whatever he decided was going to set a precedent. It was going to matter for everyone else who comes after Blake, and if he had just said Blake gets nothing, that could hurt actual victims down the road. Real victims who experienced real harassment and real trauma. They'd point to Blake Lively versus Wayfair and say, "Look, this person got nothing, so what chance do I have?" That would be damaging. So what Judge Lyman did was split the difference. He didn't give Blake the massive win she wanted, but he also didn't shut the door completely because the door being completely shut could hurt people who actually need 47.1 to work. And that's a more nuanced outcome than people are giving him credit for. So, what does this ruling actually mean moving forward? Because that's the question nobody's really answering clearly, and it's the one that matters the most. Judge Lyman basically said, "Okay, Blake, you're entitled to seek attorney's fees, but that doesn't mean you get a check tomorrow. That doesn't mean we know how much that check is going to be. What it means is there's going to be another hearing, there's going to be another court date, and at that hearing, Blake's legal team is going to present their invoices, their billing records, everything they spent on defending that defamation claim specifically. Not the whole case, just that one piece. And then Wayfair gets to look at those invoices and challenge whatever they want. They can say, this billing entry doesn't make sense, this hourly rate is too high, this attorney shouldn't have been working on this, whatever." And then both sides brief it, and then Judge Lyman decides. That's the actual process. That's what hasn't happened yet. So all the headlines right now saying Blake Lively is getting attorney's fees, they're not wrong, but they're not complete either. Here's what's striking to me about this whole thing. Blake came in asking for $300 million. $300 million. And she got 10 out of 13 claims dismissed. Then she settled on the remaining ones for basically nothing. So she's already down massively. And now the best case scenario for her is that she gets a portion of what she spent defending one specific claim. And from what I'm hearing from people who actually understand the billing side of these cases, we're probably talking about something in the range of 150 to maybe 200,000. That's if Wayfair doesn't object to anything. That's if the judge approves everything she requests. And here's the part that really gets me. Blake probably spent way more defending her invoices and going through this whole process than she's going to get back. It's like she won a contest where the prize is less than what she paid to enter. And the people around her who are letting her spin this as a victory are doing her a disservice because this is not the win she thinks it is. This is actually embarrassing if you look at the numbers. But let's talk about why Wayfair seems to be okay with this outcome, because I think that actually tells you something important about what's really going on here. Wayfair's insurance is covering this. We're talking about a company that's massive, that has the resources to handle this kind of thing. And more than that, Wayfair actually cares about what 47.1 means for future cases. The law covers not just sexual assault and sexual harassment claims. It covers discrimination claims too, and discrimination claims are way more common. They're way more frequent than sexual assault allegations. So Wayfair having a say in how this law gets interpreted in the courts, that matters to them beyond just this one case with Blake. And I think that's why they agreed to this, not because they're suddenly fond of Blake or anything, but because they understand that setting a reasonable precedent here helps them down the road. It helps any company down the road that has to deal with someone bringing a defamation claim wrapped up in these protected categories. They're thinking bigger picture. And honestly, I respect that. The thing that absolutely shocked me was when I realized what Blake actually tried to do. She tried to deny Wayfair their right to a jury trial. She tried to get around the normal process by using 47.1 to avoid going in front of a jury. And Judge Lyman was like, absolutely not. We're not doing it that way. That's its own kind of win for Wayfair because it means the process works the way it's supposed to work. It means you can't just sidestep the system. So now we're waiting for the next hearing, and depending on how fast Blake's team moves with getting their invoices together, we could be looking at this happening pretty soon. Or Blake could strategize and delay and try to inflate the numbers, which honestly would be the Blake move. But here's the thing about inflating the numbers. Wayfair gets to sit in court and challenge every single entry. And if Blake's out here claiming she spent $20,000 on something that clearly didn't take that much work, everyone in that courtroom is going to see it, and the headlines are going to be harsh. Because at that point, you're not just arguing about attorney's fees. You're arguing about honesty, You're arguing about whether Blake Lively is being truthful in a courtroom, and that's a conversation nobody wants to have. I'm also really interested in what happens with Jennifer Abel, because she was involved in some of this too. And technically, does she have any liability right now? The answer is probably no. Not automatically. But could she end up being part of the fee obligation eventually? Maybe. We'll find out more as this moves forward. But right now, the focus is on Blake and Wayfair and whatever number the judge decides is fair. What I keep coming back to is how early this case moved, how fast the dismissals happened, how much evidence surfaced after the fact. Because if you look at it from a pure legal perspective, Judge Lyman was working with incomplete information when he made his initial decisions. And maybe he moved too fast. Maybe he should have let this continue a little longer. Maybe if he'd waited for all the discovery, if he'd waited for all the depositions and all the text messages, the whole thing would have gone differently. But he had to make a decision, and he did. And now we're here. And the fact that this is the first time 47.1 is being tested like this, that weighs on him. That has to weigh on him because whatever he decides is going to matter for years, for actual victims who need this law to work, for future Blake Lively's who might try to exploit it, for the balance between protecting real people and preventing misuse of the law. That's a lot of pressure, and I think Judge Lyman understood that. The other thing that's interesting is looking at what this says about Blake's legal strategy overall. She came in swinging hard. $300 million, 13 claims, sexual harassment allegations, defamation. She went for everything, and it didn't work. One by one, the claims fell away. The settlement came and went, and now she's fighting for attorney's fees on one claim that she was defending against, not even attacking on. That's not the path of someone who's winning. That's the path of someone who's gradually losing ground and trying to salvage whatever she can. But here's what I think matters most about all of this, and it's something that goes beyond Blake and beyond this specific case. This ruling is going to affect how 47.1 gets used in the future. Because right now, a lot of people are looking at this case and they're going to cite it. And depending on how this plays out, depending on what that final attorney's fee number ends up being, lawyers are going to point to Blake Lively versus Wayfair, and they're going to argue about what it means. They're going to use it to represent future clients. And that's the precedent we're discussing. Judge Lyman made a comment in his order that stayed with me. He talked about people who don't have the means to fight these cases, people who can't afford attorneys, people who can't afford to go through the legal process, and he was clearly thinking about those people when he made this decision. Because if he had shut Blake down completely, if he had said, "You get absolutely nothing," that could create a chilling effect for real victims. Real victims might be afraid to come forward if they thought the law was just going to be used against them in cases like this. And that's the thing about Blake's case that I think gets buried in all the noise. Blake has resources, she has money, she has famous friends, she has a massive PR machine, and she used all of that to build a narrative. She used all of that to fight, and even with all of that, she barely got anything. So imagine you're a regular person. You're not famous, you don't have a lot of money, you experienced actual harassment, and you're looking at this case thinking, if Blake Lively couldn't win with all her resources, what chance do I have? That's the problem. That's why Judge Lyman had to be thoughtful. So what he did was he said, okay, Blake gets some attorney's fees because technically the defamation claim did get dismissed, and technically there's no evidence of malice on this record. But it's limited. It's small. It's not going to change her financial situation. And that sends a message too. It says this law is not for people like Blake Lively. This law is for actual victims. But it also says if you follow the law, if you go through the process, if you have a legitimate claim, the law will protect you. That's the balance he struck. I keep thinking about what the people around Blake must be feeling right now. Her attorneys, her PR people, the people advising her, because they know what this ruling actually means. They know that she didn't really win. They know that she's spinning this as a victory when it's not. And if I were in their position, I'd be having a serious conversation with her about reality. I'd be saying, Blake, this is not the way you think it is. This is not something to celebrate. This is something to learn from. And the lesson is that maybe the strategy of going after everyone, of making big allegations, of trying to use the legal system to damage people's careers, maybe that doesn't work the way you thought it would. But Blake is probably out here right now, making graphics that say something like a judge ruled in my favor today, or whatever she's going to spin it as. And that's the Blake move. That's what she does. She takes a partial outcome, and she frames it as a complete victory. And the people who actually follow the case, the people who read the order, the people who understand what attorney's fees actually means, we're all just going to be sitting here watching her do that and shaking our heads. The next step in all of this is probably going to come pretty quickly. Blake's team needs to get their invoices together and file them. Wayfair needs to review them and challenge whatever they're going to challenge. And then we get a hearing. And I'm genuinely hoping Judge Lyman schedules this properly and doesn't announce it on a Monday when the hearing is on Wednesday, because honestly, that's not fair to anyone involved. Give people proper notice, let people prepare.